How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to my channel, and before we get started, I wanted to go over the update on the analysis of the Bronze Age artifacts believed to contain copper from Michigan's Upper Peninsula in the Old World. The update can be found on Ricardo Calvario's X page, and it contains an article written by Rick Osman about the findings, the analysis of the tests done so far, and they are still doing tests on the artifacts to get a little more in-depth analysis. So I'm going to be watching this pretty closely. And Ricardo and Rick Osmond are actually on a live stream today. I'd like to give a quick shout out to Mike and Dave's Multiverse. I'd like to thank them also for a quick shout out on their show. Rick and Ricardo give an in-depth explanation of the findings so far, so go give the video a watch and subscribe to Mike and Dave's Multiverse. During the Pleistocene, which is 2.6 million to 10,000 years ago, multiple glaciations carved the landscape of the Upper Peninsula as we know it today. The movements of the glaciers would remove copper from its veins and transport it along the reach of the glaciation. Once the glaciers melted, the large chunks and small chunks of copper would be distributed out across large areas of the glacier's reach. And this is called float copper. While most large pieces of float copper were found within 10 miles of its source, some larger pieces have also been found as far away as Bayfield County, Wisconsin, and that piece of float copper weighed 1,700 pounds. Smaller pieces of float copper can be found all over the Midwest and anywhere the glaciers may have moved through and spread out across the Midwest. Some as far as 100 miles away or farther. The largest piece of float copper that's been found near the Houghton County Airport weighed 35 tons, but unfortunately it was cut up into smaller pieces and smelted away for commercial use. The largest existing piece of float copper was found in the Houghton area, and it weighed 26.6 tons. That is now owned by Collector's Edge in Golden, Colorado. Now, it is believed that once the original inhabitants of the Keweenaw Upper Peninsula moved back into the area after the glaciers retreated, they used float copper as their main source for tools and materials because it was easily found on the surface of the ground, all over Lake Superior, all across the beaches and shallow waters. It was found practically everywhere because of the glaciers would just drop them off as they melted. Now, at some point, most estimates being 4,500 years ago, possibly earlier, the inhabitants of the area began to mine into the rock and into the ground to find pure deposits and veins of pure copper. There are an estimated 5,000 or more of these ancient mine pits between the Keweenaw, Isle Royale, and northern Minnesota on the north shore of Lake Superior. The method these miners would use was called fire setting. And the process of fire setting is to build a large fire at the base of a rock face or on top of the rock that the miners wanted to get into. And once the rock was heated enough to a high enough temperature, they would throw cold water on to the rock face. And what that would do is the quick contraction of the rock and minerals inside after being heated would start to crack and fracture, making it easier to pound out any rocks or minerals that they needed to get their hands on. Smooth stone hammers and various other tools such as wedges would then be used to chip away and break off any fractured pieces of the rock to get to the copper underneath. This process was then repeated until the pit was either too deep to work anymore or the copper in the pit or in the mine was depleted. Now, what's interesting is this type of mining was also used during the Bronze Age in Europe and parts of Asia. Similar tools have been found in Turkish mines or mines along Germany and Austria, and it's a potential connection between these two ancient civilizations across the Atlantic Ocean. And many view this as evidence to connect the Bronze Age civilizations of ancient Europe and Asia to the ancient miners of Michigan in the idea that the copper from Michigan's Upper Peninsula helped fuel the Bronze Age in the Old World. Another coincidence between the Bronze Age and the Old World and the mining in Michigan was they both ended around the same time, 1200 BC. The mining in Michigan appears to have completely stopped, and it was the downfall of the Bronze Age in Europe, which is known as the Late Bronze Age collapse. So, what makes Michigan's copper so unique is its purity, being above 99.9%, and most of its impurities involve small traces of silver. And there are only a handful of places on Earth that have this fingerprint, so to say, as Michigan's copper. But it is the only place that has evidence of wide-scale mining. Now, many other copper mines around the world, whether ancient or modern times, consist of a copper ore or copper oxide, which needs to be smelted down to achieve purity close to, but not as pure as Michigan native copper. For hundreds of years, many have argued that the copper fueling the Bronze Age came from Michigan due to the high purity of even the smelted copper found in the Bronze Age era sites was purer than could be smelted. Between around 1200 BC and until European contact in the 15 and 1600s, no known widespread copper mining was existent in the areas. So it begs the question, who were the people that mined and or traded the copper from Michigan's Upper Peninsula? Many theories are out there. There is definitely evidence of inter-United States trade among the ancient peoples, as copper artifacts sourced from the Lake Superior region have been found in Cahokia Mounds, Hopewell Mounds, and even Mississippian mounds farther south. For years, local historians and archaeologists have claimed that the Anishinaabe tribes, such as the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi, were the original miners of this copper. Unfortunately, the only recorded migration of the Anishinaabe tribes into the Great Lakes region was about 900 CE, about 3,600 years after the mining in the Keweenaw had begun. The main issue with trying to figure out who did the mining 5,000 plus years ago is there were no permanent settlements, no known burials, or anything left behind that we can use as to identify with DNA or carbon test. We can carbon test some tools in the fire and carbon that's left at the bottom of these pits. But as far as I'm aware, thus far, no bodies have been found, no permanent settlements have been found, and this leads to many theories of who could have done it. Another belief is that a migratory nomadic type people were the miners that came from the southern areas, and when the summer came, the mining season, which was nice for a few months out of the year, they could mine with decent weather. But due to the long, harsh winters of Michigan, chances are they didn't stick around long enough to get stuck and wanted to bring their copper back to their home bases. Another theory is that the mound building cultures of the Midwest and southern states were the miners, namely because many copper artifacts have been found in any mounds excavated throughout the years. And this theory could also lead to the argument that the Maya or any Central or South American societies had migrated up here and mined the copper to bring it along the trade routes down to South America, as the Maya culture also used a lot of copper. Then we have probably the most controversial theory of the ancient mining in Michigan, and that is that cultures from the old world sailed across the Atlantic to mine the copper or to trade with the peoples that were mining the copper. The most logical civilizations being the Minoans or the Phoenician, as they had well-built seafaring ships, and at the time of the Bronze Age were ruling the Mediterranean trade routes and extending as far as the British Isles to the north and the Azores out in the Atlantic that we know of. So there's reason to believe they could have made it to the Americas as well. And one final theory is that the ancient miners of the Upper Peninsula are an unknown culture that were either eradicated, pushed out, or assimilated into any of the newer cultures immigrating into the area. This would have good merit for argument because after the mining halted, the local tribes in the area went back to using stone tools and only used copper for jewelry or spiritual objects that could connect them to their manitous or their great spirits. As I've been studying and reading more into this topic of ancient mining in Michigan, I find more stories and theories than I can keep up with. Every stone I turn over is another stone left to be turned over. And I hope you join me on my journey to trying to uncover any truths or debunking any theories or finding any answers to who mined the copper. Where did they go? Where did the copper go? Did it fuel the Bronze Age? Was it traded transatlantically? Hopefully we'll get the answers. So I thank you for watching today's video, and if you have any theories or want to reach out with any ideas or artifacts or local stories of the ancient copper mining in the Upper Peninsula, reach out to me on my X is JeffUP_North and I'd like to get any new information that I can't get my hands on through the internet or through any books. So, thank you very much. You have a good weekend.